Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, as you know, we are constantly getting messages from our listeners through, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook Messenger, email.
There's text message.
Text message. Yeah, text messages. That happens too. Yes. Just questions that are relevant in terms of leadership and potential content for the show. And we try to put a mix in of things that we learn about online, things that we're going through in our own careers, things that we can relate to personally, combined with a mix of questions from listeners where they have something going on in their personal life. Well, we have a list of questions that have been kind of accumulated over the last, I don't know when the oldest one is. It could be 9 or 10 months ago, but a lot of these questions that have come in from people who it's not actually pertaining to a specific example they're going through in their life, or if it is, they didn't relate it to us. They just had a question, and I tend to gravitate more towards the questions where someone says, "Hey, I'm going through this right now. What can I do?" I feel like I'm giving advice to a person in a moment where they need that advice, and I like that. But that doesn't mean that the other questions aren't important, because chances are people are going through something. They just didn't kind of articulate it in a way that says, I need to know this for my particular circumstance. It ends up just kind of sounding like a generalized question, but those are just as important. And so what I want to do is, over the next 5 episodes, I kind of want to clear out that backlog. I want to go through a list of these questions that we've received from our listeners where I think they're important to talk about. And, each of them might not need a whole episode. We might be able to tackle a few of them, for each one. But if we have listeners out there who are wanting to know these things, then, let's give them some answers.
Yeah, I think it's so important to really get to some of these things, because to your point, a lot of these questions may not be specific to an example, but just dialogue around what's going on in the leadership space, around certain theories or applications of certain ideas or theories, and or just general just wanting to have general dialogue about these things to help maybe shape how other leaders are thinking about them, or what their approach might be, or what their opinion might be on them. So I like that we're doing this, and I like that we've been able to spend some time kind of bringing these themes together and figuring out what the meat on the bone is of the questions that we're getting when it applies to certain things.
Yeah, I agree. And some of these might be kind of like a blending of 2 different questions that we've gotten that are similar questions, and we kind of want to make it more concise. But the concepts and the topics are really relevant when it comes to the role of a leader and kind of the changing expectations of that role. And so the first one I want to start out with is, what do we think are the biggest shifts in employee expectations that leaders will need to adapt to? I like this, because I think this is one of those things where you can look back over history and clearly find evidence of the expectations changing of employees over time, in both the broad, large sense, and also in the short term too. Like, you have these massive changes that are slow rolling, that take place over generations. And then you have potentially very quickly expected changes, what to do when you're supporting employees that have to become remote all of a sudden for a pandemic. So all these changing expectations will continue to happen. But this question is essentially asking us, what do we think is around the next corner that isn't necessarily on the radar yet?
Yeah, and I think it's a really important question to kind of be asking ourselves all the time, around what exactly is the workforce? What are people showing us in their behaviors or their requests that we need to show up differently or better in as a leader in the businesses that we have? And I think probably the first thing that pops into my mind is just that openness and willingness to truly authentically connect with people. I think what I see a lot right now, and that I think leaders should be prepared for, is people say everybody wants to know the why. Tell them the why. Start with the why. And I think that ties to just this overall curiosity of wanting to know things, especially when so much information, so much knowledge is readily accessible to ourselves through our devices, mobile devices, and the internet. So the funny thing is kind of like you've got this whole realm of you can ask any question that you want and get either the answer or a lot of opinions around an answer very, very quickly. But the amount of times that I see people wanting to ask the question, why of another person, it still shows me that there's an element there of a curiosity that wants to have some dialogue, that wants to get somebody's personal testimony, their opinion. If you're the leader, they want to hear your thoughts on this thing, or they want your perspective on the question, because we all know we could just get the answer according to the internet very, very quickly. And there's a lot of answers that are great on the internet. There's a lot of answers that are subjective but are kind of passed over as actual facts. But the fact that we have the answers at our fingertips, but we still see people wanting to ask their leaders why, I think that that's actually something that's tied to something deeper, which is that element of kind of trust and interaction and dialogue with the leader, to not just get the answer, but to get the answer from their perspective. And I think that's something that we're continuing to see more and more of.
Yeah, I think you're really, really spot on with that. I remember thinking in my past that that it didn't matter if a leader actually cared, as long as the actions were benefiting me to begin with. Like if they, they could believe what they wanted to believe, or care or not care, and that didn't really like matter to me, as long as I felt like I was treated fairly, and my reviews were rooted in something that was factual. Like that's what counted to me. And I don't know when it shifted, but even for me, it shifted, over a period of years, where now it does matter to me whether or not a leader of mine actually cares. And I think it doesn't matter to me in the standpoint of like will I show up to work? But it does matter from the standpoint of, am I going to give it my all? Like, am I going to feel truly engaged in the work that I'm doing, and feel like I'm working towards something bigger than myself, and feel like the work I'm doing is valued? Like, all of those kind of those broader implications when it comes to employee engagement, those are the things that I think really are hinged on whether your leader actually cares, and not just whether or not they say they do, or whether or not they use the actions that are available to them through their role in the organization to show that they care. There are other things that show that you care, that show that you have a genuine love of people, I guess is the best way to put it. You have to love people. And if you are a leader of people and you don't just love people in general, I'm not saying you have to love every person. I just mean people. Like, does the idea of being around people energize you, or does it make you go like, oh, I need to get back to my room? Like, does the idea of being around people make you feel like you are able to make your mark on the world? Or does the idea of being around a lot of people that you like and dislike to varying degrees in general, does that idea, is that a challenge to you that you can overcome, or is it something that is emotionally and mentally draining to you? And leaders where it's emotionally and mentally draining, I think have a much harder time showing that genuine care and compassion. And for leaders who are energized by it, even if it can be taxing in the moment, leaders who are broadly energized by it, those are the ones that probably tend to come off as more genuine when they say they care about their employees. So I think it's a great start to this series about what you can be doing as a leader to meet employee expectations where they are. We have a lot more to discuss here on this episode, but before I go into the next question, let's get up for one of our sponsors. The next question I want to go over is kind of a little bit related, but I think there's enough differences to where it's important to address it separately. What trends in workplace culture are becoming more important for leaders to prioritize? And I think that the biggest difference between employee expectations and workplace culture, to me, one starts with the employee, the other starts with the leader. And this one right here, when it comes to workplace culture, it starts with the leader, not with the employee, because the culture of an organization, I think it's set by the leadership. It has to be. And if the leaders are not all in on whatever that culture is, there's no way that you can expect the employees to be there.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it, I use the word, and it's the only word I can think of right now, and I don't like it in most references, but in this reference, it makes a lot of sense, which is gatekeeping. Like
Oh, yeah.
the leaders need to gatekeep the culture. Like the culture will always be defined by the work of the team collectively. Like everybody is involved in creating culture, but there is the responsibility of the leader to gatekeep that culture in a way that's healthy and right, meaning that these are the things that we do. We collaborate, we recognize each other, we celebrate successes, we get to know one another, we find out ways that we can build community with ourselves, but also maybe with the community around us. And then these are the things that we don't allow in our culture. These are the behaviors. These are the things that will get you ousted from the culture. That's what I kind of mean by the gatekeeping aspect around, like, if you are not good for the culture, if you are not coming in with a set of values aligned with the work that we want to do, if you are not making decisions and treating people with respect and wanting to work as a team, that's the leader's responsibility then to have that person taken out of the culture and moved on to somewhere else, because that's the responsibility, to your point, of kind of building the size and the rules of the sandbox. Everybody in there has a piece of and part of building great and sustainable culture, but there does have to be some type of a rule set, and there does have to be somebody who's going to make sure that the day-to-day actions of everyone and the team collectively are aligned with whatever that culture is.
Right. I agree with that completely. And I think that there is, there's a fine line here too, because, you could say that there's no wrong culture as long as everybody is bought in and everybody's happy there, but that's not true either. There are cultures out there that are toxic to people who are not there. And you might say, well, if they're not there, why does it matter? Well, because if you don't have the right people in the room when it comes to the decision-making process and the strategy moving forward, and you can't get the right people in the room because that culture is toxic to them, then you'll have a real hard time maintaining the high-performing nature of a team over a period of years if you aren't able to see around corners and to see what things are needed for the future that you may not be able to address with the team that you currently have. But assuming that that's not the case, and that it's not toxic in general, there are things that might be not a right fit for you as a person, but not necessarily a bad culture. A great example I can think of to this is the military. There are a lot of people I know who would not thrive in the military. They just their mindset is not one that would buy into what it takes to buy into to be successful in that culture. But that doesn't mean it's a toxic culture. It doesn't mean it's a bad culture. It works very well for the people that are there, and there's a lot of diversity in the military. So when you have all of that combined, you can't say that it's not a good culture. It just isn't the right fit for you. And I think one of the things that leaders need to start really thinking about is being able to find that difference. Is something a part of the culture, does it need to be thrown out because it's not a good thing, or is it just not right for some people? And does that make it okay? Is it okay if it's not right for some people, or is it something that needs to go away altogether? We've heard the term cultural fit for a long time. And it can be used as both a good thing and a bad thing. A culture fit means that, if you are a cultural fit for this organization or this team, that means you fit into that culture. And that sounds like a good thing. But culture fit can also mean, let's keep the bumpers on the bowling alley, as close as we can to where that ball is just a straight line. That can be unhealthy as well. And so the kind of the gatekeeping that you're talking about here is more along the lines of, it's broad because the culture has to be kind of driven by the employees, but it has to be reined in to where the toxic elements of it don't, rear their head. But the more control that you exert as a leader on the culture, the less it becomes a true culture, because it won't be one created by the employees. It's one that created by the leader. And that's not one that people will buy into. They have to feel like they had a hand in creating it, but they also have to understand that there are things that just aren't allowed in this culture. And to find the right line there as a leader can be challenging, but it's very rewarding when it's done correctly, because the culture tends to take a life of its own on, and it will require far less kind of maintenance once it kind of takes hold and catches fire.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.